Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Life Tech and Beyond. Today, I'm joined with a very special guest, a principal product manager at Microsoft. So, Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Perfect. So, can you walk us through what does a product manager do?
I mean, the fundamental question here is they are the voice of the customer. So, I mean, if you look at any product manager review, outline, job description, it is about representing the voice of the customer. And that really means that, when you're in these larger organizations, even smaller startups, what you want to do is like define your solution. And so that is really the product manager role is, from the beginning, it's like define the problem, scope the problem down, and then from there work with your engineering teams to essentially build a solution. And then after that, really, complete the cycle by releasing it to customers, hearing how they can make it better, and then just keep going over and over again until you sort of like fix it all. Because at the end of the day, where we get into day-to-day at Microsoft, it becomes a lot of prioritization because there's so many inputs that come in with like, we want to do these 10 different things. And so you're like, well, we only have engineers for like 3. And, if we want to get something done by the end of the year, maybe we only have space to do 2. And so that's really, the PM question of like, well, which 2 do we pick out of the 10? Is it going to be the ones that, the most important customer wanted and, where we see usage, or do we make a big bet in something new where, we may not be as certain about the outcome?
Mm-hmm. So like making core decisions as well, and like where to take the product. That's like the main core responsibility.
Yeah. Exactly. So now when you collect them, go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, now when you collect a bunch of PMs, now you end up essentially owning a product, and that product's definition of like, who are we building it for? And so that all comes up back on a PM's plate.
Mm-hmm. So making decisions, that's one, but then what decisions to make, is that also part of the PM job? Is like looking at like 100%. What do we need to do?
Yeah, 100%. In many ways, it's what do we say no to, right? Because at the end of the day, if we look at it in the simplest form, when we're writing software, right? Like there is an element of writing software and then an element of using that software. The PM's role is to make sure that the folks who are using the software are getting their needs met. And, as time evolves, how are they keeping up with those changes? And again, the PM can, really goof up and sort of do different discussions or go in the wrong tangent and the user's needs are not met, and they end up sort of going to other platforms. An example like we can give here is like Skype. Skype back in the day was huge, popular for like the VoIP calling element and video calling. Bad decisions were made, technology changed. We had more mobile users coming in as opposed to sort of desktop users. The architect, for many reasons, Skype quality could not keep up. And, you have folks like WhatsApp come up and they essentially started taking the market and taking the users away. And so, you could point that to a product manager making wrong decisions or not being able to sort of look out further enough to sort of like keep up with market.
I see. Okay. And what's the process like? So say like in your day-to-day work, like when you're working on a product or like new features and stuff, like what's the thing that a project manager has to take into consideration? Like what are the steps in the pipeline, so to speak, that they go through to actually get their work done?
Yeah, a perfect example would be, the first one would be you understand what you're owning, right? Like, so in our world, I own privacy and security is one. Another customer might own, or another PM might own the video calling portion or something along those lines. So one, you understand what your ownership is. In business terminology, you want to understand what the RACI model is, right? Like there's a whole responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed sort of matrix. Where does your role fit in? Where does the PM fit in? Number one. Number two, once you've figured out your scope, your role in ownership, then it is figuring out which customers can you help, right? Like, and that is really a matter of going from talking to anyone and everyone who you could help out. Right? If there's someone on the street who thinks your solution can help out, you want to talk to them, and you even want to talk to your larger CISOs or your larger organizations who have a much larger impact. Because when you see the full plethora, now the day-to-day job part 3, you've sort of listened to many customers and you've gotten these inputs. So like some may just want color changes, some may want better video quality, some may want more like advanced security features, and each one of those things comes with an engineering cost, right? Like that is where we are constrained. There's only 5 Ryans in the world, and so we want to make sure that all of them are working on the right stuff to make sure that we're getting more customers. And so that ends up being the discussion of like, okay, between each one, how first item or work effort is talking to engineering teams, like talking to them about what, out of these 5 things that I've heard, what does the engineering effort look like for each one of these? So now you've certainly got a cost associated with each one of these projects. Part 2 or part 4 is really understanding, well, if we know the cost, what is our return? Right, like back to that earlier discussion. Well, did we see everyone ask for it? Did we just ask like the 3 corner like edge case customers ask for it? Now you've got a demand associated with it as well. So for me, that's your basic model of like cost, ROI, and then from there it is a question of like what makes most sense. Right? And I say this in a weird way because that is a fuzzy art business type decision, because sometimes signals may point you to do one thing, but because of organizational or directional leadership, you want to go somewhere else, and you feel that there's a bigger bet in that New York world. We see that often right now with the whole AI world, right? Like teams and companies are like jumping headfirst into AI, but it's necessarily giving up on some of their older backlog as well. So like, are they making that trade-off appropriately? Are they doing, because like you do a switch too hard, then you're essentially abandoning your customers and abandoning usage.
No, for sure. Yeah, I think one example that comes to mind, I think I think almost 2 years ago, Microsoft was really pushing the Microsoft Mesh, like the metaverse thing.
Oh,
but that's
yeah.
like, I think that died down.
Exactly.
Like, where did that go?
Exactly. I mean, I remember we were making avatars and everything.
Yep.
So it is a very much function of time of like where things could be and how they could go. But yeah, absolutely. Right. Like I remember COVID years, I had a little avatar of myself doing things. I'm like, I'll never use that again.
Yeah. But yeah. So how much is like say like in a company like Microsoft at such a big scale, so like the products they work on, like in your work as well, how much of it is like triaging just between what your existing customers have said versus like exploring new things so you can potentially attract new customers later?
I want to say, and so it is team dependent. So even within Microsoft, you'll have some products that like the larger Windows worlds, they'll have a lot more baggage with it. Teams even, right? Like they're now a mature product. They've got lots of customers. They've got lots of demands, and so they've got an existing backlog. In our world with ACS, mine is more 80-20 on the newer side and 20% more on the legacy. The reason for that is, we're a relatively new service on Azure, about 2-3 years old. That gets us to a place where customers may come in and try for something and ask for something in year 1. But because we didn't get back to them quickly enough, they were impatient for their solution. By year 1.5, they're already sort of gone with another alternative and sort of had their way. We maybe year 3 later, year, week, months, these are all scales, but timeline later, we'll come back to them and be like, oh, do you still want them? And they're like, yeah, but that was 2 years ago. I've got something else way more interesting now. Can you help me out with that? And so those are, for me, that's why it's more important to talk to new customers, because that way I have a fresher signal, right? Like it is, it's all about keeping a pulse on what customers want, right? Whether we're a developer product like ACS, or whether we're a consumer product like Teams, or an enterprise product like Teams, I mean, each one will have the same amount of like users and like demands from them. And funnily enough, it's like it's never enough. There's always more to do, and that's the fun part about software.
And just for everybody listening, just a bit of context. So the team Heather works in, I mean, I work in as well. It's called Azure Communication Services. So it's Heather, as he mentioned, it's like a relatively new service, I think 3-4 years old. So you can think of it like kind of within Microsoft, like Microsoft's own new startup that they created. And and within ACS, like the whole, like the service, it just, we provide other people the ability to create communication experiences. So like say you want to build your own teams, like instead of you building all that from scratch, just use the pre-existing infrastructure from like literally Teams. So talking about that, and I guess this will relate to like people who are pursuing startups or like looking into developing new products. How does like that initial what are all the different information points you look for to have enough confidence that, okay, like we're going to start this new service, this new product, this new thing. So like from your perspective, like what are all the things that we need, like people look into?
No, that's huge. I'll give you an example from my world, and the example of ACS. So this was now, wait, it's 2025. So around end of 2019, COVID had not come in yet. And there was a new hire that we just got. And he was another product manager, and he was working on some project. And, it was Project Spool, but it was just him. And then there was another two PMs there that were sort of like working on something. And I got pulled in around end of the year. And really the idea, this was more of a top-down initiative in this case, where it was like, hey, we want to externalize this existing platform, right? And so that was the input or the demand or the charter that the three product managers had. And that was it. The thing about product managers is there's a lot of ambiguity. And so that was where the statement ended. It was like, we want to externalize this existing communication platform that we as Microsoft have built today and sold today to teams. So, again, some context about ACS, like we're built on some of the shared services as teams. And so, these sort of calling and recording experiences can also be now offered via ACS. And so the idea was, before all of this was there, ACS, the name was there, we just had project codename Spool. And so the idea was we just want to externalize it. And at that point, and this is sort of the rule of thumb back in the day for Microsoft, was that you want to make sure that that product can make about $1 million in the first year that it's there, right? Like for the scale of Microsoft that it operates in, it needs to be a market that is large enough that we can essentially capture $1 million of sort of demand right away. Very loose, no hard and fast rule. There are other bets that they may make without that much, but that's a rule of thumb. And so this sort of led us to an example of like, is there anything else in the market, right? Like that's the first question you want to ask, is like, if you're trying to build a product, is there another product like it in the market already that may have already been there for longer than us? And sure enough, they're a communication platform that is a huge market. And there are many, many, many products, many different ways of how customers have sold it. And, it is a growing market. There is not a world where we expect folks to not stop calling each other or messaging each other, or at least communicating with each other. And so that is, the product at its core is like allowing folks and agents and people to communicate with each other. And so that was sort of the inception of ACS. And really it all started with like, okay, it's a market large enough, we see enough competitors there, then it's still not enough for Microsoft to be convinced to sort of just go in with that. It is still about like, what would be our differentiator, right? Like, what is the Microsoft edge here? Why would someone like, Walmart as a customer go to Microsoft instead of the Googles of the world or the AWSs of the world or some other like, startup of the world here? And so that is really where we like looked at our strengths of AI, of compliance, of security, of teams, and these were all sort of things that sort of were convincing enough for leadership to be like, yes, I think this is a good time for these group of 4 or 5 PMs to have more help to get through this. And so sure enough, like I talked about 2019 us being about 4 or 5 PMs. By 2021, we'd gotten something like 30 PMs. And by 2023, we were at like, I don't know, like 30, 35, 40 PMs. And so the team and the company is able to sort of invest in these sort of incubation projects because they're like, yeah, there's enough market, there's enough sort of like sound mind as far as like, a long-term bet being made here. Whether we'll see the returns, that's up to the team's execution and performance. And so that's really where it ends.
I see. Okay. So I guess just to summarize what Heather said, so Microsoft followed these 3 principles, which I would assume like this would apply to anyone like pursuing their own startup or like any problem Absolutely. They want to solve, which is one, like, can you actually make this? So in Microsoft's case, like they had this existing infrastructure and they knew that they can like externalize this. So that was one, like, can you actually make the product? So, and this applies to like if you're running a startup as well. If you have an idea for something, like, can you actually do the thing? And number 2 is like, I think you mentioned if there's any competitors. So that's a signal that there is a market out there. Sure. So if there are competitors out there in the space, like you're not the first one doing it. It's kind of like, I think Apple has the same philosophy as well. Like something I've noticed, like Android phones are always advanced in their features and Apple like always catches up. Yeah. But like it's their way. Like they don't invent it.
It's always this way. And again, like, a great example there, because you can even bring that over into the Windows world, right? Like back when Mac OS and Windows were sort of fighting it out, Windows would always come out with newer features. There were more developers. Mac OS would come in maybe later with some things, but and again, where even now, sort of where iOS and Apple sort of leans is like they'll come in later, but they'll come in with a more like complete or experience, or like a more polished experience in some ways that we like sort of put it, right? Like those are things where, the wall Apple sort of benefits them.
Yeah. Yeah. So you don't have to be the first one per se to capitalize the market. So if there are other people ready, that's a good indication. And then the third principle you mentioned, which is like, what is Microsoft's edge? Like, not there's Microsoft edge, but then like, what is your edge in terms of like, why would people use you and not someone else? I think this is like a really beautiful framework you outlined, like for someone as well who's thinking about like a potential startup or like solving a problem. It's like, can you actually do this? Are there competitors, and like why not use other people? So,
yeah.
And I would assume like this philosophy is used like across like even the tiny products within a product as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing about this is like it scales so well from like a team of 3 to a team of 300 to a team of 3,000. Right? Like each one can sort of like make those sort of autonomous decisions, because one of the things that I've learned at Microsoft is like the cost of a decision is expensive. Right? Like whether we go left or right, it may not matter, but if we can always choose back later, but if it is you can only choose once, and then it's going to be stuck there for like a good year, well, then you're going to be like really stuck in a hard world. So that's really where understanding what are your one-way doors, understanding which costs or which decisions are cheaper to make, and you can sort of fail fast. That's fine, but also knowing what are some harder decisions and harder questions.
And how do PMs manage their like the people that they're leading on like how long, like when to pivot versus like when to stick with a problem? Like how do they navigate that?
Yeah, no. So I don't know if I believe it too much, but it is the way that it should be. It is about like what the organization values most, right? So at one point, our organization may just not necessarily want usage, right? Like so that's an easy one, right? For a service that sells calling minutes is like, oh yeah, minutes are the most important thing, right? Like if you were to judge T-Mobile, AT&T, or any other sort of call provider, you would say, oh, how many minutes of calling does that service provide? And so, your simple answer now can just be like, oh, anything that can provide me more minutes is the one that's most important to us. That's option one. Option two is like, you're like, well, maybe instead of minutes for the first year, we're just trying to see completion, right? Like we're just trying to see, are we able to complete our own customers' use cases, right? And so an example here is like when we first launched, and again, first few years of the service, it was a very tight laser focus towards virtual visits, right? Again, it was a COVID era, virtual visits. People did not want to go to their doctor in person. And so they needed a solution where they could talk to their doctor via their phone without having to like put themselves through that risk. And so, we wanted to capitalize on that market. And we wanted to make sure that anytime we were sort of doing something, we were getting more users who were able to do that.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I guess we'll transition a little bit into, so this was a bit of like insight for you guys. So you're probably live, or by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you want to join these sessions live next time, you can join my community, link in the description, school.com/TMI, Tech Mass Institution. So you'll get a chance to like ask questions live during podcast episodes. So we have one question, which I'll expand and I'll ask more, which is, how does one actually become a product manager? And then like, how do you actually like say like what are the things you need to do to actually like enter the industry with this type of like to enter like this field in product management?
Yeah, no, good question. So there are a different sort of methodology or sort of approach of companies towards product managers. So an example here is like Amazon, company I've worked with in the past. Their product managers, almost 80-90% of them, they are going to be MBA grads, because that is essentially what they're looking for. They want more of a business-heavy product manager who's looking at a P&L of a business and trying to give some business forecasts. They'll have another role, product manager technical, which is similar, but now it's more technical. But again, they're looking for engineering degrees, still looking for some business and everything. Microsoft still does look for some traditional sort of, engineering, computer science degrees, but they are one of the most flexible companies where I've seen non-technical folks also be hired as product managers. I've seen folks who are like music majors or like, English lit majors be product managers. And the way to do that and sort of break into that would be existing solutions, right? Like you want to be able to demonstrate that you are a product manager without necessarily being in Microsoft. And so that means like, when was the last time you did some product management type work? Either you can show, an example of something that you saw for your own school, for your own family, even in terms of like, oh, we had this scheduling issue. And so now we are using some process to make sure that, everyone is scheduled appropriately. And so those are simple things that we can always demonstrate to show that we are interested in product management. That, and then obviously, when you're applying to these roles, lean into that. Lean into the fact that, hey, look, you may not see me as your standard comp sci product manager, but what I do bring to the table, and again, back to the thing that we were talking about earlier, this is how I'm differentiating myself, right? Like my differentiator is that I am an English-led major, and I see, product management require a lot of writing with like, functional specs and others and storytelling, which is I can do great. So, we give me a chance, and you can sort of tie that into your own sort of identity of what you want to build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, music major, that's the first one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But yeah, no, so just like showcasing your project management skills, whether that's like anything that you've solved personally, or like even like people who have a lot of like ideas and stuff, like perhaps you try to build your own product and like approach it from that angle. So I know for sure. And then I guess, how do you actually like, so you mentioned product management. So unlike software engineering, where there is this new trend of like getting hired without a degree, like product management, you mentioned it still follows a very traditional path, like MBA and a degree.
Mostly, but it's still not necessarily, right? Like, I've seen again, like an example of like PMPs, right? Certifications often get folks notice as well, right? So if you're not doing your standard, like, 4-year program, then maybe a certification of PMP. There are other, related Scrum Master type courses that folks take that make them stand out as good product manager candidates as well.
Okay. So certifications are important as well. Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely, right?
And then
another example.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, cut you off.
No, I was just saying it's another example of like, being a product manager without necessarily being at Microsoft, right? Like anyone can go in and get a PMP certification. You don't need to necessarily be at Microsoft for that.
And how much does having a technical background help with this? Like, do people who want to be a product manager, should they invest time as well into like learning the technical lingo?
That can be a very hotly debated topic. I'm glad there are not that many viewers that can sort of make this scary, but does it help to have a technical background? So I did my bachelor's in computer engineering. I would say yes, right? Like it gives you an edge as far as understanding systems, right? Like you're not necessarily expected to sort of like know different sort of like API interfaces, but understanding how different systems would work or how they are expected to behave in some certain conditions, that gives you an edge, right? So that is where I would say engineering helps, and the technical background helps. Whether or not, like, someone who's non-technical, can they pick it up? Of course they can, right? Like this is one of those easiest things that you can like learn as far as what to do. I remember one of my first days at Microsoft, they mentioned that everyone has to be a good drawer, right? And what I mean by that is like there was a white wall in every office or a whiteboard in every office and a marker with that. And so the way you can go about it is like you can even draw 4 squares and now you've got the Microsoft logo. You can draw a circle and 2 other triangles and you can do other things with that as well. And so that's really where it helps to have that technical background, because you can always like put out your solution on the board and sort of see where a triangle would need to come in versus a square versus a circle to sort of build the solution for eventually a Heather or Rayon sort of sitting on the other end.
I see. So it's not just like technical is one part of it, but then your overall problem solving abilities and stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, exactly. I mean, I would like look at anything that is man-made or any product around you. You can imagine whether or not they had the title or not, there was a product manager involved in making that decision, right? And so it's that like, and you can always get into their mind of like, well, why would they have chosen having a trackpad there versus not on the top or something? Like, it makes sense, and again, those are things like that kind of. Because you're really in between, and I've seen like developers transition into product managers as well. They make some really strong product managers, right? Like oftentimes they'll have a proof of concept ready for the developers as far as what they had in mind for the developer team to sort of have a head start. So, I'd say that that's always an edge. Even more so, and again, not sort of harp on too much on being technical, but if you're on a product that is technical, right? Like, so if you're a product manager where you're shipping APIs or SDKs like ACS, you want to be able to sort of have the ability to go in Visual Studio Code and run your code, right? You want to be able to sort of run the service. You want to be able to play around with that code as a developer would run it, because you can imagine that scenario as well as you can, but it's unless you're able to do it on your own, that's when you'll figure out so many new things.
Yep. Okay, so we have another question, which I'm still trying to understand what it means exactly, but so it's a question. So they asked that they're building an AI-powered automation platform. We'll give a shout out as well, Dutha AI. Check it out, guys. No idea, but I'm not sponsored or affiliated, but giving you guys a shout out. So hope you like it. Okay, so we want to explore how Microsoft supports startups and integrating their AI tools, so like Azure AI. What programs or technical partnerships are available? Okay, so I assume the question is like we're building something that's trying to leverage Microsoft's infrastructures like Azure, OpenAI, and stuff.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ways that like any technical programs or something that they can do? I mean just Googling documentation, like just literally ask GPT like, hey, I want to build this, like what Microsoft service can help me do that or whatever. So
Yeah,
I don't think Microsoft, I guess you can talk to this as well. We'll like abstract this question a little bit. Does Microsoft themselves actually support people onboarding to Microsoft? Like say like enterprise level?
Yes, in a way. So what I mean by that is like, so each product technically or in one form or another will have a customer engagement team, or some sort of a customer product manager. What I mean by that is, taking AC as an example again, we'll have folks come in from the market, from the world, and be like, hey, I'm trying to use this ACS API for SMS. But it's not working. Can you help me out here? Now, the way they got to us, like, someone in our team, like you or someone, would be that they reached out to support. Support identified them as, a high engagement customer or sort of an S500 customer. They then redirect them to the product team. The product team then says, yes, okay, we can come in and sort of like hop on a call. Now, not everyone, and I'm sorry I've not played with Dutha yet, but I will right after this, is have that account executive or have that technical specialist sort of like make that connection. In those cases, it's these the market events are the best way to reach out to them. So an example that I used to go to a while back was in Florida. There used to be a communication convention, a CPaaS convention where anyone and everyone could get a ticket for, I think it was $75 to sort of just go in into the booth, see what Cisco was making, what Microsoft was making, and that just allowed me and allowed others to sort of connect with us. Right? And these were smaller startups that we'd not heard about then, and they were just building out new solutions, and they just wanted to understand, like, if there was a way we could get better. And coincidentally, if there were communication related, then they'll renew us. We would be also more interested because, back to the thing that we were started off earlier, whether they're a smaller startup or a bigger enterprise, if they're going to be driving some value to Microsoft, whether it's be ACS, whether it be OpenAI, whether it be Azure AI, all of those, like, they drive value. Like, there's a product manager somewhere that should be interested about hearing, what your requirements are and how you can onboard. Because, yeah, in an ideal world, either we have a sample or a quick start ready for you, or we have a robust documentation page to like get you going.
I see. Okay. Yep. And then another question I had. So I want to become a software engineer, and there's so much stuff I hear online, like AI, this and that.
Yeah.
A couple years ago, it was like blockchain and Web 3.0 and all this. So someone who that's something like I get those questions a lot. Like I want to be software engineer. Like, hey, like what do I like? Should I learn AI? Like, should I just double down on like machine learning and stuff? So I want to. I'll rephrase that question in like PM terms. So like, if someone wants to become a product manager, are these like the industry trends? Do they play a matter in like what they should be focusing on?
Yes. So I'm gonna age myself here a little bit. And I know you were the youngest developer at Microsoft around, but I am not. So 2010, right? Like, so is when I graduated from undergrad at McMaster University. At that time, ML, AI were still coming out, so we were talking about 15 years ago. And my passion was about data. It was about like not necessarily databases, but about using large scale data to sort of build insights. And so that was sort of like where my attraction went. That got me to places at Microsoft, which started with email, which was great. Then it got me into payments at Amazon, which was also fun. And then now with communication with ACS. What I want to say is that like it's important to stay current. Current right now is AI, right? Like it is understanding how is this technology that just came out, and where a lot of larger tech companies are investing in, where will it take the world in the next 10, 15 years? That's not to say that stuff that I learned 15 years ago is going to be irrelevant, right? Like that's still relevant. Like that work will still be required. But what will change certainly is going to be how that work is done, right? Like you may not, I don't know if I still have it here. Yeah, I do. My old C book, right? Like the old C, like, instruction manual that goes over all the stuff, that's not required anymore, right? Like we have the internet. Now we have GPT. And so, or AI. So this is really where I feel the replacement coming in. Is like, you need to be able to use your current tools. AI is a current tool. If you're ignoring it or not keeping up with it, then someone else is, and they will have an edge on it. And it is important to sort of like know, or even to know its limitations, right? Like nothing is infinite, and so it's important to know where does it break and where I'll need to do something else beyond it. So I think it is important. So to answer your question, if I want to become a product manager today, what do? Yeah, it's important to stay current. It's important to see where the new AI firms are coming in. One great signal of where the industry, and I've kept up with it for the last couple of years as well, is like Y Combinator, right? Like Y Combinator has so many nice startups coming in. They're very current. They're very sort of on the topic of the day. So blockchain days, they're doing lots of blockchain now with AI. They're doing lots of AI. It helps you to sort of see where the direction is going. And you've seen in our world, at least with Microsoft, like agents, right? Like agents are a new world. The agentic AI world is coming to us. What does that mean to the world around us? I don't know yet, but it is definitely going to be unknown right now.
And for those of you who don't know, so Heather mentioned Y Combinator, which is a really big probably the biggest, at least the most famous one in the world. Yeah, like a startup accelerator. So like people who have ideas for a company, they pitch it to like this entity, Y Combinator, and then they will like give you some funding as well to pursue it further, give you like industry connections and stuff, all the support you need. And they're like the benchmark, well, not benchmark, but a good signal to follow. Like absolutely. Where the industry is heading.
Sure, and I think some examples from Y Combinator that hit it big were Instacart was one, Airbnb was another, right? DoorDash, like these are larger companies to startups now, but like they started off with Y Combinator.
No. Perfect. So I'm gonna ask some questions that I'm curious about on your thoughts. If you guys watching live, because I know most of the audience will be watching later on YouTube when the episode is updated. But if you guys have any question, this is the time to do it. Otherwise, like I'm just gonna go off on some of the stuff I
question in the comment in the videos as well. I'll keep up with it.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. And then you're in the community as well, so they can reach you there.
Yes, I am now in it.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So. One thing I wanted to ask you is the trend of the industry right now is towards AI. All the big companies are like investing like crazy in AI. Is that why is that per se? Like, is that because of the like all the companies are like in a race, like who can reach like the highest AI superiority as soon as possible, or like what's leading all of this? Because like a lot of companies are, or at least how it seems publicly.
No, it is 100%. I'm going to give a sarcastic answer first, and then I'll give you my opinion here, right? Yep. So, sarcastic answer, it drives shareholder value, right? Like, I mean, that is the key here. Like, if you add AI to anything, whether or not it's necessary, like, shareholders see, like, oh, you're keeping up with whatever's latest, right? Like, that's great. To your question on
before you answer, this reminds me of I watched a video of like one of Sundar Pichai's talks on like Google I/O. Someone did a counter like how many times he says AI in like
Yeah,
5 minute talk. Yeah,
yeah,
there's like 200 times like AI,
yeah,
AI, AI in
yeah,
like 5 minutes.
exactly. It's ridiculous. I mean, if you look at all the ones that happened after like the ChatGPT release, like all of us, like Apple, Google, Microsoft,
Yeah.
there was a whole AI was the word. Okay.
Yeah.
So why AI? So two things, or I guess so sarcastic answer, obviously shareholder value, not real answer. The real answer for why I think so. The number one is efficiency, right? Like, um, an example is what if you could have two developers producing the output equivalent to four developers, right? And again, I'm not sort of saying about job replacement. I'm not going to get into that, but it is about just being efficient, right? Like if I were to start coding and you were to start coding, I have not opened up Visual Studio Code for a while. You have it more recently. Well, you'll obviously be able to like sort of do things quickly. Well, with a AI assistant, I might be able to sort of like get there as quickly or with a little more help without necessarily falling behind from you. So that's number one. It's efficiency. Right? Like it's all about like if for the individual involved, if I can get more done with less, that's awesome, right? Like if how can I get away from coming to work 8 hours a day? What can I do that all these meetings that are scheduled, my virtual avatar joins in and he can sort of just give me a summary at the end of the night when I'm putting my kid to sleep, right? Like those are efficiency stories that we would love to sort of see in the future one day, right? Like we're not there yet, but imagine, right? Like the I Am Legend story, or the hologram for the doctor. I don't know if you remember that scene, but imagine if you had that had a lot of your own knowledge, all of that set up. Well, now you're getting into a place where AI is definitely making your life better. So that inefficiency number one. Number two, it is where business, where the money is at, and I mean that in two ways. Both from investors wanting to put in money there, actually for not just two angles. There's many angles here. From investors wanting money wanting to put in money in that technology, to from the technology provider being able to provide it at scale without it costing as much, right? Like so, an example is our own Microsoft subscription, I think, right? Like it's a $10 a month subscription. That's great. Now my Copilot subscription is $20 a month. Um, does it cost as much compute to run my one query on GPT versus have all of my documents and work at Microsoft, right? So in my mind, there's definitely a cost of like, well, yes, I'm being charged $20, but it still probably costs them $1 to make that service, right? Like, yeah, there's a lot of compute, lots of data centers being spun up, but I'm not necessarily, paying for them. So they're being paid from other like, customers, other larger compute use cases. And so that's part two is like, the margins are large enough that make it like very appealing to people. And so with those two factors combined, right, like the whole efficiency and the ability to be able to sort of like drive more productivity, like that makes AI very appealing to folks. And so that's really where it's coming in. I still don't
And
think it's
does
going to be.
efficiency come at a
Yeah.
cost of like potential just human replacement? Because like if
Oh,
you have two developers doing the work of like four or five, like where's the other three now? So
right, exactly. And this is an example of like I read Mustafa Salman's book where he talks about the I think the printing system, right? So back in the day, there were handwriters, and then the printing screen came out, and now suddenly, like the folks who were handwriting these sort of articles or documents were sort of considered obsolete. I don't think that's going to be what's going to be happening here. I just think that's going to cause a boom. So to your question of like, oh, where are those two other developers going to go? They're going to go and have their own tech problem that they're going to solve. There's going to be another, whether or not it's a Microsoft product, whether it's another company, but there will be another problem that will need that sort of AI assisted employee to help out with something.
Or those two
But
perhaps are just
yeah,
working on their own product. Because I think especially now with AI as well, like a lot of these code generators,
exactly.
it's very like the barrier of entry to the tech world is very less. Like even non-technical people have now started to like create prototypes and all of this.
Absolutely, right? Like, I mean, imagine a couple of years from now, where we have our own co-pilots, right? Like, there's no M365 or specific Perplexity. We have our own Heather Copilot and Rayon Copilot. Now, I could have, a co-pilot who was essentially doing a lot of my meetings or already doing some of the, talking to customers, though we talked about collecting the customer input virtually without necessarily even giving a hint to the customer that it's not me, but my virtual AI sort of who's sort of on the call with them. And so those are use cases that will help. I still believe job replacement is going to happen, right? Like there are going to be industries that are going to become irrelevant with AI. And how do we sort of like get us to a place where we're still looking out for them is, I think, still the responsibility of, the AI producers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just to comfort people as well, like the job itself is being replaced, like not that space for a human, because like, it's not like the humans have been doing like the same works in the Stone Ages. Like new jobs have come and go. Like who thought like 50 years ago that making like YouTube videos would be like quote unquote a job? So
Absolutely.
like there's always, I think now it's just a matter of like how fast people can retrain their skills.
Yeah.
So
And we see this with every form of technology. I'll take music as an example. Like we're almost all streaming our music now. So now the artists get their sort of royalties via the streaming companies and sort of like get it back there. But there was a period when streaming was the enemy, and like MP3 and digital music was just gonna like wipe out all the profits. And so it is still all about finding a way that works for everybody. And I don't know if we're there yet, but AI definitely gets us to a place where each individual gets way more empowered than they were ever before, right? Like the ability for you and I to just have a one-person startup that is doing something is a lot easier now.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's also a lot of like especially among students, this is something I get asked a lot like on LinkedIn messages. It's like should we really invest our time studying this thing? Like people who are interested in getting into like the technical part of the tech world,
Yeah.
like software engineering
Yeah.
developers. I think there's a bit of like confusion and anxiety among them. It's like, wait, I'm spending 5 years learning this, but then there's just going to be a robot, like an agent doing all this. So
No, I mean, so my wife's a doctor. I often joke with her that, doctors are going to get replaced with AI. I just don't need it. And that's never going to be the case, right? Like at the end of the day, a world where these jobs are only AI is very far away. And it's also not just because the technology's not there, but it's also because there needs to be a human judgment, right? Like that judgment call, that direction is still a human directive.
yeah, I think it also because the AI wave struck like the creative professions first. So like a lot of
Yeah,
like for example for me, right, where if I wanted to design something, like I would hire a graphic designer, like
absolutely.
design a banner, a logo. I just do it by
Exactly.
myself. So like that
Exactly.
thing, yeah.
I mean, the designer's one. I have a friend of mine who uses this app called, I don't know if you've used it, Replit.app. Essentially, it's an AI-driven app development. So essentially, imagine you can sort of give out a product spec about like, hey, I want some pages like XYZ, these elements and everything, and so it'll try and sort of consume it. One could argue that, oh, suddenly now, we've just, in an old world, in a pre-AI world, I would have had to find a developer. I would have gone to Fiverr or somewhere and sort of got someone to sort of like build me that, test page or that sort of proof of concept. That does not remove the need that if I wanted to actually start making money or start like, productionizing it, like I need like another developer to sort of like make those judgment calls with me. And that's really where it still is needed. And, AI is not able to replace that.
Sounds good. Okay, we'll end off with our last question, which is
Okay.
what like just general advice would you have for people who want to pursue this path of product management and by extension like pursue the
Yeah.
tech world? One, like how do I think you touched upon it briefly as well, like how they navigate all this like stuff around them. Like it just feels like every new day the industry is changing so fast that you're just stuck. Like you're like, wait, what do I even focus on? So like what skills, experiences do you think are very valuable for people? And that would
Yeah.
be like time trendless almost. Like it doesn't matter what the current trend is, whether it's like the metaverse, whether it's AI, Web
Yeah.
3.0, like those skills
Yeah.
will hold. So what are some of those things you would tell people?
So at its core, I'd say follow your passions, right? Like, so with product management, it's the same with any others, right? Like, you have to have a passion for it. And I'm not saying have a passion for like waking up and sending emails about like, different priorities or like doing a backlog in the morning. I'm talking about like being the voice of the customer, right? Like, talk to your mom, talk to your dad. Like, what is a technology problem that they're having? What is something that they wake up with and they're just like, oh man, every time this like WhatsApp does this to me or something that does that to me. And so, how would you solve that problem? I remember seeing back in the day, you'd see different mock-ups of different solutions. And, now with Android, like, you can almost always make one of those mock-ups now as well, like make a reality. But in terms of, what would a phone have? Like, can I have an additional sensor for temperature? Can I have an additional sensor for all those things? Well, you can, but the question is always going to be, and, the product manager approach is going to be, well, what am I going to use it for? Like, am I going to use it for doing some other, high value customer action, or am I just going to like have it just to increase my cost of my device? And so that's really what I mean. So follow your passion, and then apply product management to it. That's it, simply it. Like, if you see a problem, be your own product manager, and it's about PM your life, right? Like, if you're a 30 mid 30-year-old person and now you're figuring out like what to do for the next 5, 10, 15 years, well, figure out what makes most sense, right? Like, what is your $1 million feature, or what is it that you're going to be investing in that you think is a big bet, or you think is something that you've seen others do that makes sense? Is it a YouTube channel? Is it another Instagram sort of page? Is it a side hustle of something else? But like, it is about like seeing the market, right? Like, and PMing your life.
Perfect. I think that's a good phrase, PMing your life. I should make a shirt out of that as well.
Yeah, sure.
We'll split the royalties. PMing your life. Okay.
All you're the one executing it, man.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. No, but thank you so much, Heather. It was amazing getting insights into product management. What's it like being like a product manager at like the pinnacle of the tech world, Microsoft. But amazing advice for people as well. I hope you guys who are here live, I hope you guys enjoy it, and people who will be watching later on YouTube, hope you guys, or Spotify, you can listen to the podcast on Spotify as well.
Oh, nice. Subscribe there.
So thank you, Heather, again so much. It was amazing to learn about everything.